I told you we'd get back to Silvia's story, and it simply reinforces what we've been saying all along. The question is proneness. The drug doesn't cause addiction. It's proneness to the drug that is the problem. So here is Silvia's story. Valium is addictive. It was prescribed for Silvia to help her deal with two problems, back spasms and stress. And since Valium is an antispasmodic as well as an anti-anxiety agent, I almost kissed the doctor because he found a single drug that would take care of both problems. Silvia, she took 2 of the 30 Valium that were prescribed her. She never took a third. I asked her why, and she said it made me groggy. Like what? She said, I couldn't do my work. I couldn't, get the laundry done. I couldn't concentrate. I did not like the feeling. Silvia didn't like Valium. She threw the rest in the toilet. Okay? So here you have a drug, Valium, that is clearly addictive, but when Silvia takes it, she says, ugh, yuck. Here's the story of Vernon and Victor. One of these two is the real name for this individual. Here's the story of Vernon and Victor. Vernon and Victor ended up in the same hospital. They had the same surgery in the same hospital, performed by the same surgeon, who gave them both narcotics to deal with their pain. Both vomited. Narcotics are particularly productive of vomiting. Okay? Both vomited. Vern loved the drug. Victor didn't. Vern ended up an addict. Victor didn't. The difference is whether or not an individual is prone or protected. And you know that for every drug that we've mentioned at least tonight. Some people are terribly prone to having trouble because of the drug, whether it's as innocuous or as helpful to some people as amoxicillin. For other people, it causes them terrible problems. And if they love that drug, it's going to be hell on wheels because you love a drug that causes you problems. So the issue is not the drug, it's whether or not an individual is prone to the drug. So again, you're avoiding these extremes. Here's another one. That soft drugs will inexorably lead to hard drugs. Now you've heard that in these terms. Marijuana is a gateway drug. That's how you've heard this. That the soft drug, they call it soft, the soft drug marijuana will in fact invariably lead to harder drugs like heroin. Now if they did, if all soft drugs inexorably led to hard drugs, if they did, how many heroin addicts would you know if all the people that you knew in college who used marijuana went on to heroin addiction? How many heroin addicts would you know? A shitload, right? There'd be a ton of them. Because you knew a lot of people who smoked pot in college. Did they go on to heroin addiction? And if they did, my God, we'd be overcome with heroin addicts. It would be absolutely out of control, heroin addiction. The truth is that some people use the drug, marijuana. Some matured out. In other words, they used it for a period of time and then it wasn't such a big deal and they stopped using it. Some used it heavily and matured out of heavy use to now use it socially. How many of you know a social marijuana smoker? Smoke socially and sociably in modest amounts without resultant harm. Okay? It is a potentially addictive drug, but the truth is that, it does not it does not inexorably lead to hard drugs, or else we'd be overcome with heroin addicts, and we're not. What you got to remember is that correlation is not causation. Two things might go together but do not cause each other. There's a high correlation of blonde hair with blue eyes. All right? In other words, if you look at blonde-haired people, a ton of them have blue eyes. Okay? That does not mean that blonde hair causes blue eyes, or that blue eyes causes blonde hair. All right? Just means they go together. They go together often enough. When you try to figure out which drugs are, quote, gateway drugs, the way they try to figure that out is they'll ask people who are heroin users, what did you start with? Guess what they started with? Alcohol and marijuana. That's what they started with. And so, yeah, for that particular crowd, but not everyone who uses marijuana goes on to heroin addiction. We can't tell people lies and then expect them to believe us later on. Now, the reason that parents want to tell kids that these drugs will inexorably lead to hard drugs is they want to scare their children into compliance. They'll say, if you start with marijuana, you're going to end up being a heroin addict. And then, of course, they'll show them a movie like Train Stopping and scares them bejesus out of them. Unfortunately, kids know that doesn't always happen. Does it happen? Yes. Does it happen with great frequency? I don't know. I don't know the statistics on that. But I think it's probably an exaggeration in an attempt to sort of protect children. They want to say, if you don't use the drug, you won't have a problem. Well, that's true. That's true. But you can't tell a kid a lie on Tuesday and expect him to believe you on Wednesday. He's not going to believe you. So, and yet marijuana has stolen motivation and alcohol has taken lives. And how soft is that? So, yeah, marijuana can cause some serious problems if you are prone to it. In the same way, alcohol can cause serious problems if you're prone to it. If you're prone to it. But to try fear as a way of educating the world is never going to be successful. And what we will, in fact, breed is mistrust of ourselves as a source of information. People won't believe us. The issue is proneness. The issue is proneness. So you got to unlearn your notions of alcoholics and drug addicts. Alcoholics have been called, now you wouldn't want to be one of these, I'm sure, the children of darkness, drinking the devil's brew, megalomaniacs, dipsomaniacs, irresponsible, immature. Unfortunately, that doesn't match the population, all right? The population are not well described by those particular phrases. There are some very wonderful people who are alcoholics and drug addicts. They get nastier and nastier as time goes on, but for a while they can keep things under, not control so much as manage their alcoholism. In other words, manage the public image well enough so that you don't recognize that they have a drinking problem. Beside that, labeling today's adult addicts as antisocial lawbreakers really fails to recognize that at one time university professors, in fact it was a Harvard professor, once told us that we should tune in, turn on, and drop out. Right? You remember who he was? Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary. And in fact, not only should we tune in and turn on and drop out, but that the trip was an exploration of reality, not an escape from it. So, we're never going to get the truth if all we do is debate in extremes. We've got to be willing to say that the truth is the truth. Here's another one. Drug addicts are hopeless. And there are some studies that want to prove that, unfortunately. In one study, 10% of all American adults 18 and older consider themselves in recovery, so at least 10 aren't hopeless. And 23.5 million American adults are overcoming an involvement that they once considered problematic. So no, it's not a hopeless disease. People do recover from it. And I think what we're going to find in the near future is that more and more people are going to recover from it. Once we get the stigma out of this thing, once we stop thinking of it as a form of badness or evil, people will start realizing that there are certain people who are prone to addiction, and when they get it, unfortunately, it changes them. Unlearn alcoholism. Alcoholism is an addiction. I had a group therapy. I may have told this story before. In group therapy, I had a young man and an older gentleman in the same group, and I asked the young girl to explain her intoxication, and she did. She said, "Well, with the first one, I get a little lightheaded, and the second one, I feel difficulty focusing my eyes, and with 3 and 4, I have trouble with speech, and with 5 or 6, I may start to stagger a little bit." And so I stopped her and I said, "What does that sound like?" An elderly man in the same group said, "She was getting drunk, right?" And I said to the young girl, "Tell us what drug you were describing." And she said, "Quaalude." Quaalude. And I said, "Wow." The guy said, "Sounds just like getting drunk to me." I said, "Well, that's because they're basically the same kind of drug. They're in the same class of drugs. They're sedative hypnotics, and so along with alcohol, you're going to find Nembutal and Tuinol, and in fact, that particular drug." I said, "Damn." So I said, "She's an addict, just like you," to the elderly man. He said, "Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm not an addict. I'm an alcoholic." And I said, well, alcoholism is an addiction. And so it's just a matter of history and chance that we call you by one name and we call her by another. But the truth is that you both are addicts." And he said to me, "I'm not an addict." Couldn't get through. It didn't penetrate because he thought that somehow that in terms of character that they were different people. And, in terms of character, they may be different people, but their addiction is an addiction. And it's the same with alcohol as it is with that particular drug. The progression and dynamics of addiction are similar regardless of the drug. In fact, I used to claim that if you sat in that group and you closed your eyes and we distorted their voices, and I had 8 different kinds of people in the group. There was a cocaine whore, there was a business professional, there was a street punk, 8 different folks. You couldn't tell me who was telling the story because they're all similar stories. That they have an addiction, they love the drug, they pursued it, despite the consequences, they persisted with it, etc., etc., etc. It's an addiction. It's an addiction. Now, alcoholics and heroin addicts, they both break the law. The truth is that one of them does it before just to get the drug, and the other breaks the law after using the drug. Is there a difference between an alcoholic and a heroin addict? Yeah. One breaks the law to get the drug because it's illegal, and the other breaks the law after he's drunk. But they both end up breaking the law, so they both end up having had antisocial kinds of experiences. You got to unlearn what you think about AA and NA. So there are people who will say, "Nah, I don't want anything to do with AA. No God for me. I'm an agnostic." I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of that stuff, so please don't, regale me with AA literature. And you can be an agnostic in AA. The higher power is simply a power greater than yourself. Now, because it was developed by guys who were Protestants, you got the Christian word, God, used instead of some other word for a power greater than yourself. So in AA, you really only have to believe that there might in fact be a power greater than the power of your mind in isolation. That's all. Is there a power greater than the power of your mind? Start there. Oh no. Well, then you're claiming you're it. I am the higher power. I ain't going to believe that. You're the higher power. Who the hell are you kidding? You're the higher power. So that's all you have to believe. You believe in any higher power you want to believe in. What they're saying essentially is this, that what we have found that successfully replaces alcohol for us is something spiritual. Not necessarily religious, something spiritual. There are Jews in AA. There are Muslims in AA. All right? Hit the right meeting and you'll meet some. But it's not necessarily a Christian notion of God. Another objection is I'm not a group person. AA is a group process. I'm not a group person. I'm saying, well, you don't really have to be a group person, all right? You can go and use and get from the group whatever you find acceptable in getting from the group. And I understand that there are some people who aren't group people. They are uncomfortable in group situations. They feel awkward. They are embarrassed by interacting in groups. There is such a thing as spectator therapy. There is such a thing as people will gain significantly even if only listening. Okay? You probably know that. You probably knew in school some kids who weren't very verbal as far as their learning processes were concerned, but boy, they picked up everything. There is such a thing as spectator therapy, that you'll gather something from this. And you don't have to be. If you go and they call on you, say, I'd like to listen, thank you. AA is a cult. Cults want to capture you. They want your undying love. AA wants to liberate you. They want to liberate you from the drug. So they're not intending. In fact, if during your first year of recovery you go to 2 or 3 meetings a day, I'm not worried. If after you've been sober 6 years, you're going to 147 meetings a week, I'm going to wonder what the hell are you doing to stay sober. That's overdoing it, all right? But getting sober, that's a tough road to go. Early recovery is a tough place to be, and so in early recovery, I'm not sure you can overdo it. But if all you're doing is going to AA, then I'd suggest this was meant to liberate you, not to imprison you. AA is transferred dependency. See the psychiatrists say this one to me. Aren't you afraid of transferred dependency? You know, my answer to them is this. No, I pray for transferred dependency. I'm not afraid of it. In that first year, I hope they become dependent on AA. It's going to be healthy in that first year for them to overdose on AA, if you will, all right? No. Again, if after a couple of years you're still overdoing it, we had an old-timer who used to run a treatment center out in the West, He used to say, you get sober to do something, not to sit around in an AA meeting and tell people how sick you are. All right? AA is for those without willpower. No, it isn't. It's for those for whom willpower doesn't work. Do you need willpower to get sober? Yes. Yes. You know, the great one is not going to come down and tap you on the forehead and make you sober. So you have to have the will to be sober. My recommendation would be that you don't count on willpower alone as your best tool. Supported willpower can work. Supported willpower can work. Willpower, you need that to get through the door. But to say I'm going to use that all by itself as a way to stay sober, you're not counting on the return of denial, the love of the drug, all the things that abstinence doesn't accomplish all by itself. So yeah, you need the will to get sober, but don't depend on that all by itself. By itself, it may not be enough. You hear people say, and this could be true in certain cases, a doctor, physician will tell you, my professional reputation would be at stake if someone said that I'm an alcoholic. My response to that is, better that they know you're a recovering one than an active one, you know. But yeah, there are meetings for professionals. Only professionals may attend. Strict confidentiality is there. You're told who you see here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. And they need that kind of protection. It is, after all, Alcoholics Anonymous. Anonymous. It's based on anonymity for two reasons. One is because anonymity is a form of humility, and number two, it's a protection. It's a kind of protection. So, unlearned independence and dependence. We have this. Why? Because we're Americans. Right? How does an American solve a problem? We grab it and we shake the shit out of it until we've got control of it, right? A very Western mind approaches a problem. It thinks that we overpower things, that we grab, that we control. And yet, AA doesn't suggest any of that. Their approaches are about letting go. But here you are with an American mind and what's called a bootstrap mentality. Haven't you heard that phrase? You got a problem? Lift yourself up by your bootstraps. Whoever made that up never wore boots. Because I defy you to do it. Right? So here's what we're saying you to do. Lift yourself up by your bootstraps. So if you have a pair of boots, go home, try them on, and see if you can lift yourself up by them, by the bootstraps. It's meaningless. It's silly. Can't be done. It's impossible. And yet, that's the kind of head you come in with, that I've got to control, that it's all about me, it's all about my power, it's all about my will, my energy, my stamina, my stuff. Okay? Who do you know that does life all by himself? Who do you know that counts on no one for anything? I don't. Maybe you do. I don't. The people I know always depend on others for help in one way or another. You know, I know some people who are financially independent. Okay, they don't need another nickel. If they had another nickel, it would be, it would be the silliest damn thing in the world. I know some people who are loners. Okay, but I don't know anyone who is completely and totally needs no one for nothing. We all sort of count on each other to provide what we don't have. I share my talent with you. Someday you'll share your talent with me. No one lifts a piano up by himself, right? And I'll tell you one thing, I'm always convinced that no single person in this room is smarter than all of us together. The trick is if we can put our ego aside and pool our strength, then there's real power, and it's collective power. It's the power of many talents coming together. Okay? You have to unlearn your perception of sobriety. Drugs can lead users to equate happiness with excitement and peace. I mean, here you have been drinking and drugging, and the way you think of happiness is, wee, it's a party, we're having fun, it's wonderful, wowie, zowie, zingo. I don't know why we think that way. Well, fill in the blanks. You ready? Drunk as a skunk. How many thought skunk? It happens all the time. I've done it 1,000 times. Happens all the time. Guess what? You're right. Drunk. I apologize to the alcoholics. You're a smelly little black and white creature who runs around the world stinking it up. So before we get to sobriety, we got to do drugs. So high as a... Right again. Thousands of audiences, thousands of times. Same answer every time. Now watch this one. Sober as a judge. Right? Sober as a judge. So you say to someone, you're going to get sober, and you know what they think, don't you? I will never smile again. We're going to be as sober as a judge. What are you doing? Well, I'm staying sober. Are you happy? I'm content. I'll never smile again. I will never laugh again. Tell people, no, never mind. Interesting, our perception of sobriety is that we're going to end up judge-like. You think in English. Did you know that? Ever want to test that notion? You can't think outside of language. It's impossible to have a thought without a word associated with it. In fact, try it. Try having a thought that has no word associated with it. Do it now. You come up with a tune, right? That's not a thought. It's not an idea. That's a musical tune. You know what's going to happen, no matter how often you do this, in any group there's going to be one person who will say, I got one. And if he does, you have to tell him what it is. You have to ask him what it is. And if he's going to tell you what it is, what does he have to do? He's got to put it in a word. He's got to put it in a word. There's a question about Helen Keller about whether or not she was a human being when she did not have language. And Annie Sullivan gave her language. And she could start to think and become a human being in the process. If you don't know that story, you ought to find out the story of Annie Sullivan and her work with Helen Keller. Deaf and blind from birth, Helen Keller was. Okay. So we think in English. So you got to be real careful about the language that you do your thinking in. Okay? Eskimos have dozens of words to describe snow. Americans only have a half a dozen words that describe snow. So how do we think of sobriety? Here's what we do, and I'm going to take you back now to the third grade. And you remember the third grade when you were taught the parts of a sentence, and who was the subject? The subject is the doer of the action, right? And the verb was the action, and the object was the receiver of the action. In English, we say this: sobriety bores me. What that means is that the doer is sobriety, and you happen to be the innocent receiver of the action. So you didn't want to be bored, but life started today and it said bore, 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 bore. Oh, okay, I'm bored. It's only in English that we use the verb bore as a transitive verb. In fact, in other languages, they say it this way. I bore myself with sobriety. I bored myself at the baseball game. Okay? So which is the truth? Which is what really happens? What are the operations of boredom? Is it that the life bores you, sobriety bores you, you're just the innocent victim? Or is the truth that you are the doer of the action when you're bored? And what you do is you bore yourself, and you do that by not getting invested in something. A pitcher's duel can be either boring or exciting, depending on the viewer, right? I bore myself at baseball just means that you didn't invest in the game. You didn't give your energy to the game. You didn't want someone to win and someone to lose. I kind of think it's a lot more liberating to think that I'm the one that does bore and I do it to me. Because then I might also be in control of fun. That fun isn't something that happens to me. Fun is something I do. That laughter isn't something that subjects cause. Laughter is something that I cause. Laughter is something is a part of the way I respond to situations. It's a far more empowering sense of self to think that I am not controlled by circumstances. All right? That I am in control of the circumstances that I am in. Oh, okay. Unlearn. So I'm going to unlearn alcohol and sobriety, all those other things you just mentioned. But why new learning? Why change? Well, if you could drink like a social drinker, I guess you could live like one. But a social drinker can drink to reward a success, relieve stress, toast a daughter's wedding, celebrate Christmas. With this difference is that a recovering addict cannot use alcohol, though he has the very same needs, wants, and desires. So you have all of those same desires and needs and want. You know, Christmas comes for you too. Hanukkah comes for you too. All life celebrations, they don't stop because you're recovering. You know, we're not going to have Christmas this year because you're Irish Catholic and, well, we don't want you to suffer. We're still going to have Christmas, God damn it, all right? So, how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to deal with the fact that you have all of the motives that other people have to use a drug because they use it safely? You can't use it safely. And yet that doesn't change the fact that you have all the same needs. So here's a predicament you're in, you know. A social drinker has three options. He can either drink, not drink, or drunk. Right? He has three choices. A social drinker can say, I will not have a drink, thank you very much. Or he can say, I will have a drink and only have one or two and go to hell home. He can also say, I think I'll get shit-faced, and do it. He doesn't generally do that a lot, but he can do it. It is a possibility. If you're faced with an addict, unfortunately, one of those options disappears. The problem's loss of control. So the addict's options are to either not drink or drunk. Eventually, in other words, he'll lose control. Eventually, he'll decide he's only going to have one drink and have 6 or 7, and end up drunker than he had any intention to be. So if those are his only options, then his choices are whether to be dry or sober. Now, dry is a condition of body. Dry is defined as the absence of an intoxicant. Sober is defined as a state of mind. It presumes dry, but it goes further. So, if your options are either to not drink or drunk, then the best way to try to accomplish this is to stay sober, not just to remain abstinent, to change and develop a sober mind. In fact, if you don't get sober, people will say you only have one option, and that's not to drink. Recovery. Let's pretend today is the 16th. You're going to face some monsters in recovery. Here's some. First one's guilt. Why? Well, because you've done some crappy things while you've been drinking. Guilt looks backward. You cannot have guilt about something that's in the moment. You have to look backward. It's always in the past. It has a purpose. It's to move you toward amends. But after it motivates you to make some amends to some people whom you may have harmed, it's useless. It does nothing. So you can be the best guilt feeler in the world, and it accomplishes nothing. In fact, it is probably the short path to relapse. If all you feel is guilty, then after some point, you're probably going to say, I'm not worth staying sober. What the hell, I may as well be drunk as the way I am. So replace today with a measure of guilt, and you're starting to lose the one thing you have, which is what? Today. Today. AA talks about living a day at a time. Guilt's interesting, though. It reveals a couple of things. One of the things that it tells an addict is, you've lost control. How can I tell? Because you feel guilty about the stuff you did. If you were in control, you wouldn't have done the stuff that you did. So the fact that you feel guilty about the things you did while you're drinking tells me that you can't control your drinking. You've lost control of it, or you wouldn't have done this stuff. People who feel guilt have these capacities. They can distinguish right from wrong. They are sensitive to the pain of other people, and they can admit that they make mistakes. Those are good people. If you have those capacities, those are wonderful capacities. Resentment is old anger resurrected. I'm angry now if you step on my toe. If 2 weeks from now I remember you're stepping on my toe, that's old anger refelt. That's what the word resentment means, to experience again. It too looks backward. So if you spend your day in guilt and resentment, you actually go through life like this, backward. You're not present to your life because the more immediate, intense realities are all back there. And of course, you're not sure whether you're going to walk off the stage or not. It's a life lived backward. It saps energy. Resentments are exhausting. The problem is they're also energizing. Okay? So they at the one and the same time exhaust you, and yet you get some good chemistry from dealing or talking about resentments. How many of you recognize that? That sometimes resentments are kind of fun. That's why you keep them up. And yet they take your energy. Now, unfortunately, all resentments are impotent, which means that they have no power against the person that you're resenting. Right? Want to prove that? Resent someone tonight. Pick out your favorite enemy. Try to remember an incident that they did to you years ago. Wish them terrible things. Okay? Mine is, I hope they have, terminal hemorrhoids or something equally painful. But make sure you go find out what they were doing last night at 10 of 9. Because they didn't feel a thing. The only power your resentment has, any resentment has, is against the resenter, not against the one resented. I had no idea that you were resenting him. You resented him to death. And he is not dead. The only person who got killed today is you. Okay? It affects only the resenter. So guilt and resentment, projecting, crystal ball gazing into the future. What a terrible waste of time. I remember the kid who said to his mother, I can't wait until I'm out on my own and get on with my real life, said the kid to his mother. And his mother responded, this is your real life. It's not the one that's coming, it's the only one you have. In fact, your real life is now. It's not tomorrow, not yesterday. This is your real life. It is with the person that you are with. This will never happen again. This will never happen again. You may come here alone, but your mind will be different the next time. You may come with someone the next time, or without someone the next time. But this is your real life. It's the one you're experiencing in this room at this moment. And living a day at a time means being here, being in this place, keeping your mind where your body is. All right? Because then you can't resent and you can't feel guilty, because they require you to go backward in time. And so resentment and guilt and projection take you forward or backward, but they rob you of what? There's what they rob you of. Today. And this is the only life you have. The irony of time is this, that a 60-year-old and a 16-year-old recovering alcoholics have the same time. Now, I hope you noticed that I didn't say the same amount of time. I said the same time. The time they have is just today, one day at a time. So if you're 61, you have no more life than if you're 21 or 16. You have just today, no matter what your age. The ironic truth of it is that one of you may have more days than the other, but the ultimate irony is that we never know who does have more time, right? So the only thing we really know is that we have the same time. Not the same amount, just the same time. And you don't get more of it because you're 16 or less because you're 61. Life is measured out as moments in time, in which you're either present to or not present to. And you have that choice. It's hard to stay in the moment all the time. And it takes some work and it takes some practice. But it is possible, if not to do it absolutely, at least to bring yourself back to this moment. How many of you have left the room tonight? Well, not physically, but left psychologically. Sure. We all do. We all do. I think what you can do is catch yourself at doing it and come back and bring yourself back to your real life. All right? One day at a time is a way not to drink. It's a way to deal with feelings, and it's a way to live. One day at a time. I'll just end with, oh no, I won't end with it. The tools for recovery are time. It takes time to get sober. It takes time to overcome guilt. Even when you have tried your damnedest to do it, it still takes time. And so you got to give, there was an old timer who used to say this all the time, give time, time. And he meant every word of that. You know, the enemy is impatience. The solution is, instead of looking at what you're not doing, look at where you are and what you are doing. Laughter. Laughter is a tool of sobriety, okay? Why? Because it's a spiritual act. Laughter is not an act of survival. I have to laugh in order to breathe. Laughter is not always a rational act. I have to laugh because it is reasonable to laugh. Laughter comes from some other capacity human beings have. The ability to erupt with laughter. Not cynical. I'm not talking about the cynical laughter, you know, ha ha, that shit. All right. I'm talking about belly laughter, the laughter of acceptance. The laughter embraces life. That's spiritual. That's a spiritual kind of... We do spiritual things all the time. We don't recognize it, don't we? All the time. You have faith. All the time. May not have faith in this person, but if you took a pill from a nurse today, you had faith in the nurse, right? If you followed the doctor's instructions, you had faith in the doctor. If you believed what your husband or wife told you, you have faith in your husband or wife. So people who say, I have no faith, fail to recognize that we couldn't live without it, all right? Laughter and faith, they're all spiritual things. Now, you heard, no, I'll get to that in a minute. Support, don't do it alone. Support helps you deal with both loneliness and onlyness. You know what loneliness is, right? What's onlyness? Onlyness is that feeling you have when you think that you're the only person in the world who has ever, you know? No one could have been as bad as I am because I am the only person in the world who has ever thought these thoughts, felt these feelings, had these vicious emotions. And the problem with the problem of loneliness is you can't ask somebody else if they have had these experiences because you're afraid they're going to say no. And to prove then that you are the only one who has ever been this bad. So here you have loneliness, and you can't ask the question which would relieve it. Do you feel these things too? You can't ask it, right? Because you're afraid they're going to say no. You are strange, right? So how would you answer that question? Here would be a good idea if we got a group of people together who suffer from the same problem, and they sort of all told their stories, you know, together in a group, that you could probably hear the thing that you feel you're the only person who has ever done this without having to ask. Somebody asked me, why did AA work? Because they put together the right ingredients. That's why it worked. They said, let's tell our stories. Because we know that's an antidote to shame and guilt. So AA works because they worked it out scientifically. They said if it's useful and it worked for us, we're going to keep it. Now here's the next one. Another tool is that you got to take your ears along with you. Creation, that story from the Bible, bullshit. That's not the true story. We were not created out of a rib. We were assembled. We were assembly line. And God made us this way. First, He created the head. All right? Why He didn't give us bigger ones, I don't know. But He started with the head. I don't know why He started with the head. Some people would make you believe that they started somewhere else, because that they think is the most important part of their anatomy. But it was the head. Next, God created eyes. All right? Clever of God. Could have created 360-degree eyes. That would have been even better, right? Next time, God, try 360 eyes. You could see everywhere at once. But He only gave you two. He has them work in 3D without glasses. So that was goddamn clever of God, I thought. Way to go, God, 3D without glasses. All right? And then He thought for a minute, and the stroke of genius is, He figured they'd have to sleep and they'd have to keep dirt out of their eyes, so He created eyelids. Clever creation. They work voluntarily and involuntarily. So God made it so that you can determine to close your eyes if you want to, but they'll close without your will just to protect you. God was pretty clever, all right? He made one other decision with eyelids. That was clever. Way to go, God. All right. Next, mouths. Now, mouths were, he thought about that a little, and he figured, they're always going to talk, they're always going to eat, so I'm going to create lips. But lips only work voluntarily. They are not an involuntary response. All right, way to go, God. The next was a joke. Ears. If you don't think they're a joke, look at them sometime. Okay? Take a look at ears. The funniest goddamn piece of cartilage hung on the side of your head, and you only get 2 of them. Somebody said you get 1 mouth for talking and 2 ears for listening. And that should give you a clue about which is more important. Then the stroke of genius of all was this one. No earlids. Damn. So God figured you're going to have to hear. The question is whether or not you'll listen. Hearing isn't a choice. Listening is a choice. No earlids. Because if he had created earlids, you know what some people would do, don't you? They'd shut their ears. They'd block from hearing. So unless your ears are damaged, you've got to hear. Listening is an option. Listening is a freedom that you have. So I think that, you get sober through your mouth, you get drunk through your mouth, and you get sober through your ears. Self-honesty is a tool. It's both the means and the end. How do you get sober? You get honest with yourself. What do you get when you get sober? You get to be honest with yourself. You don't have to fool anybody anymore. You don't have to lie anymore. You don't have to bullshit people anymore. You can be free. And then, of course, willingness. Willingness because, your way hasn't worked. If your way hasn't worked, you better try a new way. And so what might you want to learn? Humility. When you're drunk, you figure you're either an angel or a worm. But even when you think you're a worm, you think you're a pretty special worm. You have to learn tolerance. Tolerance is, suppose we all got our secret wish, and this happened the day you said, the world would be a better place if people were more like me. Right? How many of you have ever thought that? How many of you are lying? Everybody thinks it at some time or another. Suppose it happened. Suppose it happened. Suppose you woke up tomorrow and everyone was just like you. What a world, huh? A conversation between 2 people would be, George would say to Harry, Harry, you know what I think? And Harry would say, yeah. You think exactly what I think. What's the big deal? Here's the ironic truth. The truth is that at one level we are all different, thank God. Thank God that there are, if we weren't different, the Irish would dance from the legs down. And the Italians would drink and dance from the arms up. Thank God there are Aboriginals in Australia who walk around their entire lives bare ass naked without shame. There are a lot of ways to be a human being. There are a lot of ways to be a human being. You can be effusive or you can be reserved. You can, right? We come in some interesting colors, only 4, white, black, red, and yellow. We come emotional or we come intellectual. Thank God that there are a lot of ways to be a human being. It's a benefit. This is also true. There's no difference between anybody. At one level, we're all different. At another level, at the level of feelings, we're all the same. There's no difference between you and the naked Aboriginal in Australia at the level of feelings. You have the same feelings. So the ironic truth is, we are all different. We're all the same. And once you start to realize that, you say, wow, isn't it kind of cool to be a human being? Patience. I want what I want when I want it. You know, it's an interesting word. At the University of Maryland Dental School, there's a plaque there that says, "Dear new dentist-to-be, please do not forget that the word patient, as in patient in a hospital, comes from the Latin word patiens, which means someone who is suffering." Patiens, patient, is someone who is suffering. All this steel and glass and stone that has been used to build this wonderful dental school is absolutely useless if, as new dentists, you forget that patient is someone who's suffering. Clinical material does not suffer. Human beings do. I'm proud of my dental school. I think that's a wise thing to say. And it tells us about what patience is. Get honest, it's the means and the end. Accept that, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Love. So what are we about? Some people would say the central will in man is the will of pleasure. That was Freud. What we're after is pleasure. Jung said, no, it's not, it's power. The central role of man, or the central urge of man, is power. A guy named Viktor Frankl wrote a book that summarized his experience in the prison camps. And he said something very different. He said the central will in man is the will to meaning, and that we find meaning in love. So I think everybody's going to make a choice about what they think the central will of human beings are. See, not all human beings are good at money. Not all human beings are good at power, but all have at least an idea of what it means to love. Faith, it really is, as I said before, it's so ordinary. We all have it. People say, I have no faith. I said, oh, yes, you do. You couldn't function if you didn't have faith. You're going to drive home tonight? Yes. Suppose you had lost your faith that other people would obey traffic signals. What would the ride home be like? You suddenly lost your faith that people aren't going to stop at stop signs. It'd be impossible, wouldn't it? You'd have to stop at every corner. Take you hours to get home. You not only have to stop, you'd have to look both ways and see if somebody's going to T-bone you or whatever. You have faith on your drive home. The faith is that people are going to obey the laws. So you have that kind of faith. And we have faith in all kinds of things that we don't recognize that we have faith in. And sometimes it really is people. So with that, I'll wish you good night. I'll be here next week to do lecture number 6 on attitudes. So I'll see you next Wednesday.